Hey everyone, it's going to be a little tutorial on the effects particle systems in Unity. So this is just kind of the intro, just kind of go over how to make a particle and what some of the things in there do. So brand new scene here, we'll go to Game Object, Particle System, and this is Unity's Shuriken particle system. It's the icon for it is a shuriken. It's not showing up for some reason, but it's there. So this is the particle system, plain and simple. When you start it, it adds this little game object to your scene, and just starts kind of spewing out some particles. So let's go over some of the things you can edit in here, just so you're familiar with it when we start doing some more complicated things. So number one is duration, and this is how long your particle system, the actual system itself, lasts. So if it's 5 seconds, it'll be around for 5 seconds, and we'll come back to this in a second. Looping is if you want the particle systems to continuously spawn particles forever. If you turn that off, it'll be a one-time thing. So they'll spawn however many they need to spawn, and then once they're dead, that'll be it. So it's over, these will die, and the particle system will stop. Pre-warm lets you have this as let's see here. So if I have pre-warm off and I hit simulate, the particle systems will start coming out of here, and then we'll start looping. If I have pre-warm on, when I hit simulate, they'll already be out in the sky and doing their thing. So this is if you don't want every time you start your scene for all your chimneys to start blowing out smoke and then continue it or whatever it is. You want them to already kind of feel like they've been alive before the player got there, before the particle system was spawned. So that's kind of what that is. So lifetime is different than duration. So lifetime is of the actual particles themselves. So if I have one, you'll see they die really quickly. And if I take looping off, the particles will only live for a second, but this will continue spawning particles for 5 seconds. So lifetime is the life of the particle, duration is the duration of the particle system. And so we'll kind of talk about that a little bit too. So, and delay is if you want any of the particles to wait. So if we have a 1 second delay, and their life is, so they'll wait 1 second, and then they'll live for a second. So 1,000, 1,000, they'll start dying. So that's kind of the idea of a delay if you ever need particles to kind of not do their thing right off the bat. Now you might notice in some of these values there's a little drop down list on the side here. What that'll let you do is set a range of these things. So if I go here, I can do a curve, I can do between two constants, between two curves. So if I do between two constants and I do 1 and 5, let's say, when it spawns these particles, it'll choose a random number between 1 and 5 for them to be alive. So if we hit stop and simulate, some particles will die off quickly, right? Some particles are dying over here. This particle is going all the way up here because it's living for a very long time. So you can kind of vary up on how long these particles live for. Speed is the same thing. So this is their start speed. So what speed do they have when they come out? So if I turn this to 55, they'll be very fast. Oof. And I could do the same thing. I could go between two constants, and I could do 1 and 15. And then we'll see some of them are going to go really fast and far, and some of them go nice and slow. So now you can start getting some more, like a better feel to your particle systems by adjusting their speed. Start size is exactly what it sounds like. So if we change this, particles will be bigger, smaller, and we can do between two constants as well. So if we do 1 and 12, we'll have some tiny ones, some big ones, various speeds, all that kind of stuff. So start 3D rotation. This is a new feature in 5.22 something, whatever version I'm using. I'm using 5.3.1p3, so 5.3. This will allow you to, let's just put looping on so we can see what's happening here. This will allow you to start an actual 3D position of your particles. So let's do 90. May not be overly visible with the type of particles we're using, but what this will let you do is actually control how your particles start and where they're kind of coming out of. So we'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit too. It'll come into play when we're using different types of particles. Start rotation is of the actual, if if we go to shaded wireframe, so each particle that we're spawning right now it's called a billboard. It's just a square. So start rotation right now you'll see is wherever we rotate the camera, these are parallel to the camera, right? If we do a start rotation of 45 degrees, then they'll all spawn at 45-degree angles. So obviously with just the little floof that we're using right now, you can't really tell, but if we change our material here, just give me a second. I'm just going to make a new material here. I'm just going to call it effects. Just 1 second. I'm going to throw that on there. So if I throw a different material on here and I make it a particle system additive, and let's add some sort of texture that isn't a perfect circle so we can actually see when things are rotating. Yeah, let's do this, guys. This is a little sprite kind of thing I have here. It's a little kind of flash. So you'll see that if we have it set on 0, they'll be, you know, perfectly square. My texture is painted sideways. So if I wanted these things to be actually equal to the screen, I'd rotate it, and I could do the same thing. I could do start and end, for start rotation, I could do between 0 and 360. And so as these things spawn, you'll see that they start spawning at different rotations. So then we can start getting something a little bit more interesting. Next is randomize rotation direction. So you'll see here this one, it kind of randomizes how much to randomize the actual direction of where they start. Again, just another layer of how you want to spawn your particles and what they're going to do and all that kind of stuff. So I won't go over that too much. It's really just another form of rotation. That. Okay, so this is a 0 to 1. It's just how much do you want to vary this stuff up and all that. So start color, same thing. I can colorize my particles if they're a certain type of shader. So if I want to color them red, I can do that, and I can do the same thing between 2 colors. So some of them will be white, some of them will be red, and some of them will be in between. Gravity modifier we'll talk about in a little bit too. So simulation space, this one's really important. So when it's set to local, if I take my particle system and I move it around, it will always stick with my particle, with my base, right? When I move around, my particles will always, they're spawning as children to this particle system, basically. If I take my simulation space, change it to world, well then, each of these particles, when they get spawned, they're now stuck in world space. They don't care about what happens to their parent. So when I start moving around, you'll see they start spawning in world space and they stay there. They don't inherit any of the motion of their parent particle system anymore. Scaling mode is, I haven't played around with this too much. I think it's a new thing too. But it's basically how you scale it. I don't really know too much about it yet, so can't really overly explain that. And play on awake is just a flag if you want to hit, I guess with the simulate button it doesn't do that, but. So if you ever want to have this play the second you spawn your particle system, or you actually want to use code to turn that on, or to actually like spawn it, you can do this. And then we have max particles. So you're going to be adding different emission types and stuff like that, and sometimes it's hard to know exactly how expensive things get. So you could always change this to just be 5. So do what I'm asking you to do, but never spawn more than 5 particles. It's like a max cap of what your particle system's doing. Good if you're having like really bad performance issues with a specific particle system and you want to have a quick way of optimizing it. Next, we'll do the emissions tab. This is how you're spawning your particles. So by default, there's just a rate and a time. It's set on time. So if we do 10, then every second it's going to spawn 10 particles. If we don't have it set on looping, then for every second of our duration, it's going to spawn 10 particles, and those particles will live for 1 to 5 seconds. So so that's kind of how that works. And that's on time. So if we set it to 1, it'll make 1 particle every second. If we set it to 100, it will do a lot of them. So this is kind of where you start saying, you know, how many particles come out. So this is by time, so no matter what happens, so this is kind of a little example here. So it's on time, so every second it will spawn 5 particles. So no matter where this thing was around, you see how sparse these particles are because I'm moving, like, let's say this was on a player that's, you know, flying through space, and I wanted to make a jetpack. Well, 1 particle a second, well, my character can cover a lot of ground in 1 second, so that doesn't really quite work for me. I can change this to distance, and this, what will happen is this will spawn 5 particles for every unit of space that I cover. So now, 1 second here, why are you doing not set on burst? There we go. I don't know why I did the weird thing in the beginning. So now for every unit I move, it's going to spawn 5 particles, which is really nice if you want to have something that that spawns like a trail or whatever. I mean, obviously this can get very expensive, so you might not want to have this, you know, set to 1 or set to, you know, your lifetime to be too high. Maybe you want like 0.3 in 1 second, and then maybe we want to do like 10 particles, and then we could start having a nicer trail. Right, and then the faster your character moves, the more you'll have to increase that. Right, but if your character is moving at a decent pace, you should be able to get a nice trail. So that's kind of the distance versus time thing. I don't know why mine are bursting out like that every time I start moving. So let's turn this back to time, and we'll talk about bursts, which bursts are really awesome. So let's say you had an explosion that you wanted to do. So, you know, if I turn this off looping, great, it's going to spawn a couple particles, all well and good. But it's going to spawn 10 particles over the course of 1 second. Let's say I didn't want that. I didn't want any particles to spawn over this time. I wanted to just spawn a chunk of particles all at once. Well, I could do a burst. So I could set this. We'll talk about this time in a second. So by default, it adds 30 particles, min and max. So now when I hit simulate, it's going to go bam. It just spawns 30 particles in one go. So let's increase their speed a little bit. Let's do 10. 15. Bam. So every time I hit simulate, every time this particle is spawned, it's going to do, it's going to spawn 30 particles. So I can't set this on looping as well. So it's 1 second long. So at the beginning of every, so 1 1000, 1 1000, 1 1000. Every time in the beginning of the loop, it will spawn 30 particles, and I could do this, you know, 1 to 30, so sometimes it'll spawn 1, sometimes it'll spawn 10, 5, whatever. Right, so cool little explosion effect kind of thing. Now, the cool thing is I can add multiple bursts, so if I want, if I wanted to add another burst, I could add another one. So what that's important for is if we had this as a 5-second thing, so it's going to wait 5 seconds. In the beginning of every 5-second loop, it's going to do a burst. Now with this time here, I could change this to be, okay, well, I want this at 2 seconds to do another one. So 1 burst, 2nd burst, right? And it'll start using your burst there. So if I wanted to do 1 at 1, so now every second it'll do a different burst. So maybe that one's 1, this one's 200, bam. Right, regular, tiny, gigantic. Right, so there you go, that's burst. So you can use that for cool explosive kind of thing. So what I usually do with this is I'll use a burst, you know, let's say 20 to 30, and I'll turn off looping, and that way I'll spawn my particle and then go poof, and it'll explode, right? Player shoots a wall, gets hit by something, and particles, whatever, burst out of them. And so that's emissions, and with emissions we use our shape. And this determines where you want to spawn your particles out of. So by default, it's set to cone. Cone, you could change the angle, you could change the radius, and where it's emitting from. So let's take a look at the first thing. So angle, so let's do a very wide angle. So our burst should look, right? It will try and use this entire angle, this 180-degree angle or 90-degree angle, to spawn those particles randomly in that cone. Let's turn this back on looping. If I turn that angle to 0, it will just go up towards that area. The other thing I could do is I can make this cone bigger, and I can make my radius bigger. So now it will spawn randomly within this circle and then move out in the angle of this cone. So if I make this really tiny, then I know my particles are always going to spawn in the same direction. So if you're doing something like player shoots a wall and the rubble from the wall falls out of here, you can do that, right, if it was sideways. And you can determine where it emits from. So right now it's from base. You could do base shell. You could do volume, so it will emit from anywhere within that cone. Right, so if I do radius, and then, right, it'll kind of emit anywhere within that cone. And you could also do volume shell, so it'll kind of just spawn from wherever there. The other thing you could do too is random direction. So right now what's happening is it's spawning from the center of this cone. Well, let's do base. So from the center of this cone, and it's going to follow a trajectory along this cone base, right, along the actual kind of outer cone area. If I do random direction, it won't follow, it won't necessarily go from inside to outside. It'll pick a random direction within that cone. So if you want something a little bit more kind of wacky looking, you can kind of get a little bit of that. So if we do volume shell, you can start getting, which one is this one, volume shell? You can see some of them are going opposite directions, and you're getting some a little bit more random kind of feel there. So aside from cone, we have a lot of different options. You can play around with these, but they have a ton of stuff. They have 2D objects, sphere, if you want things to explode in every direction, if this is like a bomb that goes off in the middle of space. Then you can set the radius, and you can do the same thing. Does it emit from the shell or from the center? So if you want to do an explosion, do that, and then you can do random as well if you'd like. And you could do, you know, radius, so you can see the randomness starts working. Doesn't quite work when the radius is so small because you can't actually tell that they're changing direction. So this is, you know, really good for a bomb or whatever. Bam! Right? We could do just crazy speeds. You know, if we do something really different. Obviously, this texture does not quite work well for a bomb, but that kind of idea. So that sphere, you can do a hemisphere if you only want, you know, you still want the circle kind of thing, but you only want it in kind of a half a world direction. Hemisphere is pretty sweet. Mesh is sweet too if you want to put in, you know, let's say we pick something from our game here. Let me see something that is actually, let's just pick a sphere, or actually no, sphere is lame. Let's pick this crazy shape here. I'm picking like a weapon that we're using. I don't know if you can actually see it in here. So this is, it's really tiny right now. So let's do 1.1. And let's do speed of 2. So what's happening is we have this mesh. I just added a mesh that we have from our game. And I can spawn off of these vertices right now. So what's happening is for every vert on this mesh, it'll randomly pick a bunch of verts up to the cap of emissions that you have. So if we have 200, it'll do a lot, and you can spawn them there. So if we do like a speed of 0, you'll see it's just spawning along the vertices of my mesh here. Kind of interesting. So I could do, you know, I could do different materials, you know, normal offsets if I wanted to, you know, kind of do it just on the outside of my mesh or whatever, in random direction, all that stuff too. So this is kind of useful if you want to spawn something on top of an object and you want the particle specifically to follow that. So if we have this as a world, you'll see here it'll spawn these these little versions of my mesh because we don't have any speed on them, so they don't actually move after they get spawned. But quite handy. If you want to use that, you could do mesh renderer, you could do skinned mesh. Again, circle is just, it's a flat object, so if you just wanted to spawn things within a circle, you can do that. This is for, you know, mainly 2D games, but I'm sure it has, you know, its uses. All right, that's really cool. And if you took off burst, if you did, so it just kind of spawns from the circle there. So pretty cool. Anyway, shape is awesome, right? Between shape and emission, you have quite a lot of control over what you want to do. And you can use burst with regular rate. So if you want, you know, a little bit coming out all the time, and then once in a while for it to explode, you can do that as well. 200 is a lot of particles. There you go. You can start getting some fireworks going, all that kind of jazz. Pretty sweet. All right, so let's talk about some of the more complicated things to like really customize your particles here. You could do velocity over life. So what you can then start controlling is what happens over the course of the particle's life. So do you want to add some velocity? So let's pick a z velocity and let's add 5. So let's turn the speed here down to 0. So what's happening is now I'm using the velocity of the actual particle. So if I do 5 on here, 5 on there, I can kind of start controlling which direction they're coming out. And this can work together with speed as well. So you'll see here they start, they're still using their individual speeds, but the velocity is still like shooting them one way, and then they're still moving independently of each other. You can also set this to world if you want to shoot it towards world space or local. And you can do random between two constants like anything else. You can even do negative numbers. So if you want to, let's do a speed of 0. So you can start kind of getting some various kind of feeling velocities over there. So all kind of depends, again, how you want to work with things, but that's kind of velocity. Limit velocity over lifetime is actually something that's really, really handy. So let's crank our speed here of our particle. This is a really fierce explosion. We want it to go whoosh. But let's say this explosion is underwater or something, so there's a lot of friction to these particles. So we don't want them moving the speed all the time, so we want to limit their velocity over the lifetime. So we could say, what's the limiting speed? So right now it's set to 12. I want them to eventually only travel at the speed of 1 or even 0. But I don't want them to do it 100% of the time, so I want to start influencing when this starts happening. So now you can see I could start going boom. So they use their speed really quick, but over their lifetime, they start using their new speed, so then they stop. And if I put this to 1, then they go fast and slow down. So it's a nice way of adding some kind of varying, friction or drag to your particles. And again, you could do this between, 1 and 2, so then you could have particles kind of doing different speeds. Let's turn this to 2 so our explosions don't overlap. So a really nice way of, again, doing some kind of underwater or space explosions if you want something to be fast but to slow down as it continues its life. Inherent velocity is pretty cool too. Let me change the speed back to 1. So inherent velocity will inherit the velocity of your moving object. So right now it might not be working very well. Let's do local. Let's do world. Let's get rid of burst. So initial. So now if you see here, as I move my particle, you see how they're flying towards the direction I was traveling? So if you want something to actually inherit the velocity of your object, you can get some really cool, feeling things to there. So if you had, whatever it is on your object or car or character, and you want it, if my player stops, I want my particles to continue traveling that direction. So really cool kind of option for being able to get some nice kind of mechanics and feels to things, right? You want them to inherit velocity. This is kind of like a percentage, so if you want it to be just 0.1, like a little bit. So just a little bit of inheriting, not a ton. All right, but really cool. You could do some really neat stuff there. And then this is initial, or do you want current? So if you want it to, right, it does some weird stuff like that where, so initial is just when the particle is spawned, what's the velocity of the object? So, those particles that were spawned during my movement, they're going to continue forward, but all new particles and old particles are going to use my old velocity. Whereas current, they will all be updated all the time, which is really weird. Not quite sure what you'd want to use this for, but I'm sure you could find some cool uses. So inherent velocity, proto suite. Force over a lifetime is a little different than velocity, so let's take a look at what we can do here. We can do a cone. All right, let's do a small cone. All right, so now we're traveling in an up direction. So this is velocity over a lifetime. So if I start increasing, oh, I don't want the Z, sorry. So if I start increasing the Y here, I can start bending my particles. Because what's happening is it's force over lifetime. It's not just force. So what's happening is they're starting to use their regular speed, but a force is being applied to them the longer they're alive. So the more they're alive, there's more force dragging them towards the y direction. And again, you could do that on the world. So y is obviously up in the world, so it's going to be different. Local. And you can also do random between two constants. So if I wanted to do -1 and 1, then I'll kind of get, them pushing and pulling in different directions. I could do a randomize, so it'll kind of, pick some numbers there, and 5. So I'll kind of try and randomize a little bit. And I could do the same thing for x, so -5 and 5. And I could start getting like a little bit of a flow of, when, I want my particles to go straight, and then I want them to start getting some force and kind of random force over their lifetime. You can do some really, cool stuff with all that. So force over lifetime, pretty sweet. You can add like a cool jitter to your particles with that too. So you can see some of them are kind of going up, going down, right? World, depending what you want. So you start getting some like randomness going on to those guys. And if you do limit over lifetime, then you can slow them down. Right? So this is limit velocity over lifetime. So force is different, so it won't affect it as much over there. But you'll see you start kind of getting different fountain-y kind of feels, and you start getting some interesting stuff there. If I do, that, and I start doing negative for both of these, then what's going to start happening is my particles are going to shoot up with their speed, and then over a course of their lifetime, they're going to get dragged back down, which is kind of like gravity. But you can kind of fake that if you want it to go in a different direction. I don't think we talked about gravity, did we? Oh yeah, I guess we didn't. I kind of skipped over that one for some reason. There's a gravity multiplier or modifier up here. It's just if you want your particles to have gravity. So as they spawn, they'll start falling. And you can determine how heavy that gravity is. So if you want it to only be a little bit heavy. So you kind of get the same feel as adding a negative force on the y. But force lets you do some more funky stuff. Gravity is just kind of like an overall just gravity setting. So let's turn that back down to 0. All right, so that was force over a lifetime. Let's see what else we have here. We have color over lifetime, which is pretty sweet. So typically what we use this for is to fade our particles out. So we don't want them, popping out when they're dead. Let's make this a little bigger. All right, so right now these particles just boop, 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 they just get destroyed. So I can go in here, oops, and turn their alpha channel to 0. So this top bar here, these top two little keys, they're for alpha channels. So you see here, as they live, they just fade away nicely. And I could add multiple keys by clicking up top here. And so if I wanted to just mess with this stuff, I could just add, crazy, if I wanted them to pulse for whatever reason. So now my particles will kind of pulse and flash. But if I just wanted them to fade, I can select these, hit delete. You can also save these as presets. We'll talk about that in a second. And then this bottom row is your colors. So if you want them to go from red to green, and I'll take my random start colors. I'll just try and take those to 0 so they don't do that. So now we can have our cool particle systems turning from red to green. Obviously, you could use this for fire. Right, so if you wanted to do, let's do yellow. Hey, I said yellow. Yellow to red to black. Right, and then we change this guy back to like a poofy circle. I'll say more poofy circle. Where's the more poofy circle? There we go, we got some different textures here. All right, we can make the size bigger, 1 and 2. And then we can, slow it down. All right, we can make our live 3 and 2 and 3. Maybe a little faster. Oh. All right, so there we go. And Now my particle is set to be an additive particle, so when I set something to black, it's actually just going to make it see-through because additive particles are see-through. So I can always change my particle type if I want to just be alpha blended, which won't sort very nicely, or I could do a multiply if I want it just to be dark. I could do like priority additive. You can play around with what these guys get turned into by setting their different particles in here. I can do additive soft as well, so it'll kind of try and not overlay as much. But anyways, you can kind of start doing some nice fires or whatever kind of things by changing up these colors. So if I wanted to do this back to red or change it to a purple for whatever reason, if it's like a nebula or a bluish color. Right, whatevs. And we can move these around too, and if you wanted to add one here, and maybe it starts off really white or even really blue. Alright, you can start adding some pretty cool stuff. And now we're getting this cool mix of our colors because we have various start sizes, right? So if we do even 0.5, right, we'll get different start sizes. 0.75, whoops, 2 minor points. 0.75, various speeds, various lifetimes as well. So we're starting to get a nice interaction of particles because of their various sizes, start rotations, and things like that. So, and again, we can limit things over a lifetime. All right, so you can start playing around with these guys. Anyway, so that's color. Nice thing about color too is they have a preset feature. So you just click new, and it'll add it there. So if I do another one, oops. So if I do, whatever, this one's now green and purple and yellow, whatever. Right, so I can click on one of these guys if I want to replace them. So now I can go, oh, I like this one, I like that one. So if you have multiple particles, if you like a feel for something, you can make some presets and not have to redo all this work every single time. So that's color, that's pretty sweet. Next we have color by speed. So you can also change color the faster, slower particles go. So, oh yeah, once my particles start slowing down, then I want them to fade away. Same idea, you could do it's just the same bar here, and then you can do speed ranges. So what's 0 to 1, whatever your speed ranges are going to be. So I'm not going to bother with that because we don't really have a lot going on there. Excuse me. Then we have size over lifetime, which is also super important, and this one is in the form of a graph. Oh, by the way, color over lifetime, you could also do multiple gradients if you want to vary stuff up a lot. So color over lifetime, if you click on it here, you'll get this little particle system curve view. So what's happening is you get a little curve editor and a whole bunch of presets on the bottom. So what's happening is up here is your 1, so it's 100% of your scale that you have, and 0 is 0% of your scale. So and here's your lifetime, so from 0 to 1 of my lifetime. So what do I want the scale to be? So right now it's going to start off being 100% big, and it's going to continue being that size until it's dead. So I could do a linear thing where it's going to grow. I could do a slight curve, so it's going to grow fast and then kind of plateau out. I could do some of these presets. I can do backwards too, so it'll start big, and then once it gets to the end, let me turn off limit velocity. You'll see that it starts shrinking, which is a nice way to get like a good feel for certain particles and things like that. So yeah, it uses quite a bit. You see, you can start getting really different feels just by changing the size of things. And really, I mean, if you wanted to mess around, you could take this graph, you can double click on it, and you can start editing this curve yourself. So if you wanted your particles to pulse for some freaking reason, right, it started doing some really cool stuff, which all this stuff comes in handy, right? It's just up to your imagination after that. And same thing, you can save these presets if you have a curve that really works well. If you have a cool, like, yeah, sine wave that like bounces around and changes scale, you could just click here and save that guy. And oh, right here, sorry, you can save it, do some other stuff, and save all your dudes. So let's do this one. So that's size over time. Again, you can do multiple constants or curves, and then you can also do size by speed. So faster your particles go, they shrink, whatever you like. Rotation over lifetime is pretty awesome too. So you'll notice that even though these particles are starting at a different rotation every time, once they're spawned, they stay facing that direction forever. So if I wanted to add a little bit of a flare to my particle system, I could add some rotation over lifetime. And so right now it's 45 degrees, so over the course of their lifetime, they're going to rotate 150 degrees. If I do 360, you'll see the whole starts spinning like crazy. 45 is nice. It's just like a little bit of spin. You'll see here, you just get a little bit of spin. If you add a more interesting texture to your particles, here, 1 second. Let me find something interesting. There you go, there's some hearts. Yeah, some hearts spinning. Circles is a terrible thing to spin. There you go, you get some stars spinning. Alright, so that's kind of what the spin does. It works really well for various different types of textures. Alright, so if you had like a whatever swirly goop kind of thing, right? Just having a little bit of rotation over lifetime, very different than just that. Right, so really cool thing. And actually one thing I didn't do over color over lifetime is I like to fade my particles in as well, just so they don't pop on screen. So they kind of fade in, stay visible, and then fade out. So anyways, that's kind of the quick breakdown of those guys. Let me pick something here. There we go. So that's, what was that? Rotation over lifetime. Again, you can do separate axes. You could do between two constants. So if you wanted to have some particles not rotate, some particles to rotate, you can do that. You can do rotation over speed, like all of those. External forces are really cool. If you set this to on and 1, you could add things like, where are they? Create other, nope. You could add a wind zone. Where you at, wind zone? Let me just zero this out so everything's in the same place. There we go. So we added a wind zone. So now you'll see that my particles are getting pushed that way, even though I didn't do that. And then we have that. Right, so you can use a wind zone to do some interesting things like that, where you can just add, wind for whatever, chimneys or whatever, if you wanted to change your particles overall without having to go edit each of them. It's pretty sweet. So in the wind zone, you have things like directional or spherical. Spherical is pretty cool. If anybody played Lost Orbit, and if you remember the text that you flew through, that was a mesh emitter with no speed, and I had one of these spherical wind zones in on my player. So when you, let me see if we could make this. So when you went through, it would push your particles out of the way. So you could add this to a player, to something, add a little bit of turbulence, right? However much wind you want it to have. So you could have some fun with adding some external forces to your particle system. So that's that. It's a simple just checkbox. It's no big deal. So external forces. Collision is pretty sweet too. So if we make a 3D object, make a cube. I guess I should have made a plane, but whatever. So let's take this guy here. Let's get our particle system. Let's change this to just be some circles. Yeah, that's fine. Let me change this from additive so we can actually see what we're doing. Multiply, yeah, whatever, a little bit darker. Alright, so let's change our size to 1 and like 0.3, so a little bit different there. And we put our gravity down. So right now, I have my gravity fallen and they kind of fade through this, this square here, which is great. But not quite what we want. So if we want to do collision, I could set to be planes, and I could put what planes I want if I want a really specific thing for my particles to hit. But actually just change this to world. So now what's happening is every time a particle system hits anything in the world, which is 3D, which this is heavy, but it works quite well, you can visualize the collisions of each of your little particles there. And you could add, how much bounce there is, so 0.2, just have a little bit of a bounce, have them hit there. Lifetime loss, what happens if they lose a life or gain life when they hit things. You could add a lot of bounce. You could do some dampening. So if you want them to just fall and stick, right, 100% dampening, that means they won't, nothing will happen. So there you go. You just have them kind of dampen a little bit, have a nice little bounce to everything. And you can set what layers it collides with. So when you select an object, like this cube, I can set the layer to be, player layer. Let's say we only wanted our particles to only affect player layer. So now if we go in here and I set nothing, it'll fall through. If I set player layer, it will interact with my player, but it won't interact with other collisions, so optimization kind of thing. So quite nice. You can do how high quality your collision is. You can do send message if you want to have code catch when particles are being collided with things to do whatever it is you want to do with that. You can do enable dynamic colliders and just kind of play around with this. So you can do 2D, 3D, and again, planes or world, and all that kind of stuff. So this is a really nice, polish layer to when you're doing sparks or whatever. You want them to hit the ground when they explode or whatever it is. Really nice effect. You can do that. So that's collisions, and with collisions and other things, we have subemitters. Subemitters are pretty sweet. So what happens when we have three options? What happens when a particle is born? What happens when a particle collides with something? And what happens when a particle is dead? So I can turn this on. And now what I can do is I'm going to lower my emission rate here just to like 2. All right, and maybe spread out my particles a little bit. So now what happens when a particle system, let's do 3. So what happens when a particle system collides with something? I can add a new particle system. Let's say I wanted it to die every time it hit something. So I could go in here. I'm going to add a little plus sign. It's going to get a little crazy at first. So by default, it's going just to make a sub particle. So in here, you'll see in your hierarchy, it added a subemitter. And by default, the subemitter is just like an explosion of things, which is fine. It's kind of what I want, but maybe not so many. And I want it to be quick, 0.5, right? And so then I could just start doing a whole new particle system. And maybe I want the speed to be, between 1 and, 10. No, maybe not 10, maybe 2. I want my shape to be a sphere, radius 0. Maybe my size, I want it to be 0.1, 0.5. I want my particles to be red for whatever reason. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to do maybe a little bit more, 12 and 5. So every time a particle hits the ground, it's going to spawn a little explosion, right? And that's just a nice way of controlling what happens. Now I don't have to use this for particle collision. I could drag this particle system into death, for instance. And I can just take this guy and just hit delete if I don't want him to do that. So now if we take off collision and we have a particle system, these particle systems turn off gravity as well. So they'll live, and when they die, they'll just go boop. Now they look kind of funky because I do have them fading away really quickly. But if I had them just fade at the end there, right, then when they die, they go boop, 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 and they die. So if you want it, this is really nice for bubbles. If you had bubbles flowing up and you want them to pop in the air and just spawn a few little particles to kind of burst. Right, you kind of do that. So it's quite nice. You just add some subparticles. Now this can get really crazy. You could do on birth. So as things are born, they spawn more and more particles. And again, it can get pretty bananas. So be careful with that, but it's pretty sweet. So texture sheet animation we'll cover in another tutorial. This is a whole other thing itself. But basically you could put a whole bunch of, you could put a sprite sheet in here and then run through those different sprites to kind of animate your particle systems. Now, last but not least, or I guess second last, we'll talk a little bit about shaders too. There's this renderer thing here. So let's up this a little bit. Let's do, where were we here? Let's do 12, and let's increase the speed a little bit. All right. Okay, so let's do 3. Let's do 0.6 on smaller particles for this one. Okay, so let's take a look at what options we have under the renderer. This is pretty important here. This is kind of where you kind of start when you make particles, so I probably shouldn't have left it for last, but whatever. So let's take a look at shaded wireframe. So by default, we are set to Billboard. This is our render mode. Now what Billboard is no matter where my camera is, if I'm looking at the bottom of this particle system, these squares, the sprites that are being spawned, they're billboards. They are always facing the camera. It doesn't matter where I look. All right, so this is just it's a square with a texture on it, or a circle on it, it's a circle texture. Doesn't matter where I look, that is always going to be a circle. Now I can change that. I can make it a horizontal billboard, so it will always face horizontally. So it's great, you know, if I'm looking at this top down, but maybe, you know, from the side it starts to look a little bit funky. And I could do a vertical one as well. Right, so from the top, it's going to look pretty funky. This is great when you want to like force them into something. If you're doing side scroller and you don't really care about it like facing the camera, but you want it to do something specific like that, you can. So stretched billboard is the next one. What this will do is it'll stretch your particles based on a few different options. So you have three options. You have camera scale, speed scale, and length scale. So length scale, you can just stretch the length. So as your particles go, they're just gonna be longer for their lifetime. So I can set this to 0. Speed scale will allow you to speed things up or scale things based on speed. So you'll see here they kind of start off as circles, and then they'll start stretching as they get going. And I can do a negative on that as well. So if I wanted to get different variations, so this is cool if you want to do like a a quick explosion. So if we had this set to a sphere, and I increase my speed to like 12 and 20. This might be a little crazy. I might not use speed scale, or maybe I'll do, you have to do something a lot smaller. And instead of time, I did a burst. Oof. All right, let's do that. I'll turn this back to additive. All right, so there you go. And we have, I can limit my velocity over lifetime. Right, maybe not so much. Speed 1 and 5, or maybe 3. There you go, so it starts slowing down. So I have my speed scale. I kind of want it to do the opposite. I don't know why it's doing it that way. It should be starting to be stretchy and then get smaller. I may have some other stuff in here. Color over lifetime. I'd have to look into that. It should be, what I would want it to do is start off really stretchy and then get, get shorter or get less lengthy as it goes. But really cool for explosions if you just wanted to do, this one's kind of funky because it's going to start doing some interesting stuff. But if I did lifetime 0.3, 0.5, right, and I just did, I turned looping off, and I just had, poof. So the one thing that will happen sometimes with stretched particles is, there you go. So what will happen is they'll start stretched out before they're kind of like alive. So you might have to be careful of how you're stretching them. You see they kind of like start off, they stretch inwards and then they kind of come out. So you might have to be careful of how they're stretching, what direction, all that kind of stuff. So rotation, let's take off size over lifetime. And let's do 0.1, 0.2. Alright, let's do that. Let's see if this works now. Oh, that's doing some weird stuff. There's 2. What else do I have? I have color over lifetime. That might be freaking things out. Alright, there we go. Start doing some really crazy looking explosions there. Ooh. Yeah, So there you go. You start kind of messing around with you know, with what that looks like, and yeah, you'll have to be careful how you stretch these things out, because again, sometimes you can get some unwanted results. There we go. So now we do 0.5, 0.5, 0.1. Right, turn off looping, and then you just go poof. Right, I mean, the lifetime actually could even be longer. You just want your speed to be fast. So, poof. Oh yeah, look at that. See how they're still bouncing off that box? I still have collision on there. So you can do some really cool stuff with that too, where it actually, you know, your shots kind of go off of different objects and things like that. A nice way of making explosions and things like that. Just add a little bit of, you know, stretchiness and that kind of stuff. So this is where you add your material next. So if you wanted to swap materials, you could go in here. Sort direction, if you want to sort your particles, if they're having trouble popping and stuff, you can kind of say, is it by distance, you know, whichever ones are furthest, oldest, youngest, so you kind of play around with that. You could do cast shadows. By default, they're on, which is crazy. You turn it off if you're having optimization problems. If your game's running slow, trying to cast shadows of all your particles. Again, if you're spawning 100, it's a lot of shadows. So unless I really need this on, I usually turn it off. So you could do min particle size. This is kind of like an overall setting. I try not to play around with it too much, just because you can kind of mess around with your sizes there, but you can kind of start, yeah, doing some really weird stuff. So I try not to mess around with that unless I really have to. Sorting layers, if you want to add it into a layer itself. So there's sorting layers, so you could add layers and then do whatever you want with them through code. And what else? And then you have pivot, which is actually something very important too. We'll cover it a lot more in texture sheets, but let's take a look here. Let's slow these guys down. Let's do 1 and 2. Let's just do a billboard, and let's just do one at a time. So I have this particle here. Let's change the texture on it. Let's do a heart. Wireframe here. So let's do, let's turn off random rotation. Let's turn off speed. Nice, we need a little bit of speed. Let's do size over lifetime. Oops. 1 and 3, I put the wrong thing on. Okay, so we are just spawning a heart in the center of this thing. Let's do 2. So my pivot's right here, and my heart's going to, like, these billboards always spawn right in the center, but I could adjust the pivot now. This is also a new feature in the new Unity. So if I wanted to offset my pivot, and I wanted my heart to spawn right on that thing there, right, and it'll grow from there. So especially when you're scaling particles up, the pivot really matters, right, because it looks very different when you're doing 0, where the heart's just kind of scaling from the center, or if it's scaling from the center there, right? I mean, heart's you know, heart's one thing. If you do, let's see, what do I have here? One second. Where is that guy? I have a good example of this. Just give me 1 second here to find my textures. There we go. Okay, so this is a splash kind of particle or picture that I have. I'm just working on it, so it's not finished. So if I have it coming out from the center, it doesn't really make sense for it to be splashing out of something. So if we had this, let's turn collisions off. So if we had this particle, you know, splashing from outside of this box, let's say, right? Like I hit it and water comes out. Now, this doesn't actually make any sense. But if I do minus 0.5 on the pivot, let's do a burst. Okay, there we go. So now it's actually bursting out from, where we hit it. Let's do 1.5, just give it a little bit of a break there. Right, so we have a lot more control over how this actually looks when it's coming out. And I can adjust my scale, so, it doesn't start off super small. Right, maybe I don't want that, maybe I do want it. So your scale is going to be, quite a big animation feature for you. So let's say I want it to splash out really quick and then kind of, take its time growing for the rest. So kind of like, water. Oops, I did something crazy there. So you can click on any of these points in the scale or any curve editor and change the handle type. You can adjust your handles. So I want it to grow fairly fast and then just kind of like stay floating in the air, right? So that all controls your animation kind of style, right? So we'll go get some water. And now when we start a random rotation, I could do, minus 20 and 20. And it'll rotate off of that pivot. That's what's awesome about that pivot point there. Hold on, let me actually get this. All right, so now we're actually rotating off of that pivot point, which is awesome. And then I could do, if I do more emissions, so I do 1 to 3, or let's do 3 to 5, which gets a little crazy. And then maybe my size will be from 1 to 4. Right, I could start getting some various looking water kind of splashes. It's not great. I would definitely do a color over lifetime. Let's just get rid of all of these points because this is a crazy looking water right now. Right, so and I would have it, dissipate. All right, maybe get darker if I wanted it to. It's a little bit of water, right? Maybe I'm splashing out, too many of these things. 2 to 3, and then maybe I want it to be, a little bit bigger. And then I could do, I'm doing random rotation. I could also do rotation over lifetime because I want that water to kind of feel like it's almost falling to the side. So I could do rotation over lifetime, and maybe 45 is a little much, so maybe I'll do 20 to minus 20. I could have it fall in different directions. So now I'm starting to get like a little bit of it's splashing and then kind of falling off the gravity while it dissipates. And then I would probably do, another particle system. So I would just take this guy, duplicate him over. Nice thing is if you have a particle system that's a child of another particle system, if you click the top one, it'll spawn both of them. And so this one, I would probably do a different material. So let's do effects 1, and then this one I'm just going to do like bubbles or dots or whatever. All right, so now I have some dots. I'll probably do 0.2 and 0.3. All right, their pivot I don't care about. And their emission I would want to be a cone. Speed I would want maybe 2 and 3. And then burst I would want 10 to 15. Speed maybe like 4 and whatever. So now I'm getting some bubbles splashing out with my water too. Right, so 5, I could limit my velocity over a lifetime. Right, maybe a little less. So I want my bubbles to kind of start slowing down. All right, so something hits, splashes out, and I could also do maybe a force over a lifetime. So I want these things to fall. So I want to do negative y. Let me just do a constant for now. There we go. So now I can increase my speed a little. I mean, I could also just do gravity as well. I could also increase gravity if I wanted to. And then I could have these things splash on the ground and hit and splash some more. So that's kind of just a simple way of doing a couple different particle effects. So I might even want to just keep this guy simple. There we go. And you could add some more to it if you wanted to add more splashes, different dots, right? But that's kind of the idea. So I would use multiple particle systems, right? Time them all together. And then I would have this, I'd probably make it a prefab and then just kind of spawn it whenever something hit the water or did whatever. So, well, hopefully that's a decent overview. The last thing I didn't really overview, I guess, is the shaders. So whatever shader material you add in here, typically stick what's in here with particles. So additive will add colors as they overlap. Alpha blended is just kind of like a transparent object. Multiply will darken things, so you won't be able to get bright, so you'll just be able to darken stuff up. And these guys will just, I think, sort a little better. I'm not quite sure what the priority ones do. You can use any shader that you want. The particle ones just work really well. You can just use a standard shader and just have all the regular stuff in there. But be wary, particle ones are cheaper and they sort a little better than just using standard stuff. So you can use whatever you like, but just be understanding that they all have their kind of pluses and minuses. So anyways, hopefully that's a good, somewhat short overview of the entire particle system in Unity. Really, I mean, it's just playing around with all these settings to get what you want. Just trying to envision what water, what rocks, whatever it is you're making do on impact, on, spawn, and trying to get that animation right. It really is mainly about the animation and timing that you're going to do. So anyways, I'll continue this. I'll do a textured animation sheet tutorial, and then I'll do another specific one, just kind of showing you another particle system that I'll set up from scratch, just so you have another example. So hope you find this useful. Thanks a lot.